If you had to deliver a last lecture because you were leaving your career or making a big change and moving away from a group of people, what would you talk about? What would you want to share with those people? Welcome to the Coming to Your Senses podcast, where we navigate the labyrinth of the mind and show ways and share ways where we can all emerge victorious. It's just me today, and I am asking the question about a last lecture because a few years ago, that was an invitation that we were given collectively. There were about 10 of us on a course for a week, an intense course. And that was the invitation for the end of the week, was to write and share your last lecture. Everyone took, as you would imagine, a very different approach to this. And many of them were talking about life-affirming things. And I took a slightly different approach. I want to flag up that I am going to be talking about subjects that many people, especially if you are in the UK, we don't tend to talk about this subject that much, especially not overtly, without it triggering some stuff for us. So as ever, if something does come up for you and you need somebody to share that with or have a conversation with, then please do reach out either through the comments on the podcast, or you can reach me directly either via any social media platform or via my email, which is jules@juleswyman.com. And please do, because I realize this is a sensitive subject, and I realize that my view on it isn't the most common view. But death is definitely something that I've thought about a lot. And it happened from the moment that Billy died. He was my great-grandparents' budgerigar, and I was probably more devastated by his passing than theirs. Maybe because I saw his body, or maybe it was just because I was 4 at the time. Around the age of 5, I remember asking my dad, what happens when you die? It was a true moment from the toilet, as that's where I was perched when I asked this profound and quite innocent question as he was going about his day. Most people in my family avoid talking about death. Actually, many people in my life do. But I've always been curious about it. And even at the age of 5, whilst sat legs swinging on the toilet, it was an unexpected question from my dad, who paused briefly. It's like a light switch, Dad said, demonstrating by pulling on the bathroom light cord. It's on, click, then it's off, click, the end. He didn't wait for a moment. He was off and just went about his day, probably trying to avoid any deep question that I might ask next. He wasn't a fan, really, of deep questions or conversation, hence his avoidance of talking about death. So he just went on his day, and I sat there looking at the light pull cord, swinging my legs, and it was the first time that I realized that parents could be wrong. Auntie Liz and Uncle George, not relatives of mine, nor actually of each other, but neighbours, both died when I was around 9. And whilst sad that I would no longer get to eat Auntie Liz's infamous potato soup, or get to play cards or do jigsaws with Uncle George, I had a strong sense that their light may be off, but it wasn't the end. I had no idea how I knew, and no clue where that knowing was coming from. There was no talk of God in our house, no suspicions about ghosts or spirits or the beyond, no conversation about any of that. But death never scared me. I was sad not to be seeing people again, but I had a strong comfort knowing that their death was part of living. I knew the body decayed, a bit like autumn leaves, and I love autumn leaves. They're beautiful, they change, crunch and crumble back into the earth. They decay, merge before they continue on. And that's what I thought happened at death. It seemed natural and nothing to be feared. And I explained this to my best friend when at 14 we were sat in my bedroom talking about, well, teenage girly stuff, so probably boys and music. And she randomly blurted out how scared she was, and I mean petrified of dying. And I just couldn't get my head around it. Why be afraid of something that is natural? We decay, merge, and continue on. That's how I saw it. But she found no comfort in my frankness. nor in my candid, why be afraid of something that is going to happen? None of us are getting out of this alive. I thought it was funny. She didn't. What I didn't know then was just that 8 short years later, I would attempt for the first time to meet death face to face. Obviously, spoiler alert, I failed. But I attempted twice. Once when I was 22 and then again at age 28. I share one in episode 1 of the podcast, the experience of when I was 28. And after a large intake of drugs and alcohol, the invitation of a long sleep came, and I realized actually that I didn't want it. What I wanted was that inner turmoil, torture, and self-hatred to stop. But I didn't know how to do that and live. At 36, Julian dropped down dead on holiday. No warning, no prior illness. We were the same age. He was the friend who encouraged me to go on the green juice brigade and find exercise fun. You might think his death would have tipped me over the edge. I mean, fuck it. If green juice and the gym aren't going to save you, then what's the point? But actually, the outpouring of love at Julian's funeral was palpable, and it was something I'd never experienced. I could see how precious life was and is to those still living, and how connected we were in our grief and love simultaneously. Julian's passing was a turning point that I'm grateful for, because death came fast over the next couple of years. First, Hollis, my beloved cat of 12 years, and people often dismiss the passing of a cat, dog, or budgerigar as it's just a pet. And they're right, except they're not. The furry, fluffy, feathered things, those beings touch our hearts in indescribable ways. Jenny was a cat lover. Princess and Gizmo were the two that she left behind, and her death was sudden, unexpected, unexplainable, and she chose it. That was painful. That same year, Helen died, then Clive, then my real Uncle Bill, then my marriage. My life was more 4 funerals and a divorce than 4 weddings and a funeral. And I got fed up of being a professional mourner at a great British funeral where the stoic platitudes were spoken and the stiff upper lip were in full force. I would rather be like our European cousins who weep and wail and passionately express our grief. At least it's out there and expressed and released to move on. But no, I was taught to hold it all in. There was a brief 18-month hiatus when my funeral dress was hung up, and in that time I held people close. I told them what they meant to me, what having them in my life was like, and why I wanted them there. I treated every hello and goodbye as if it was the last one, because one day it could be. In June 2024, it was. I was leaving for a 12-week break in the States, so said goodbye to my family with huge hugs and telling them how much I love them, which doesn't really sound like much, but I have a very English family and hugging and saying I love you is not the norm. In the July, my nan passed. A hard one for my family with me being away, as well as me being the emotional one. I'm very often the practical and logistical one. Once a stage manager, always a stage manager. And with an English family who don't do emotions face to face, letting me know that my nan had died over Skype was a bit much for them. I flew home for the week, and it was the first time that I saw a dead human body. I took my 97-year-old granddad and my 76-year-old mum to pay their respects, and both mum and granddad reacted as if it were nan, pouring out their emotion in a very controlled English way. The body looked like nan, kinda, but for me it was just a body, a vehicle. Nan now only existed in my memories, thoughts, and genes. And I was sad that I wouldn't feel her soft smile and smell her baking or hear the giggling way she always told my granddad off, Richard. But for me, that body was just that, a body. We leave echoes in many forms, And there are multiple ways that we touch, impact, and imprint on others' lives, often without realizing it. And Marie certainly did that. Pancreatic cancer shortened her life in just 3 months. She was 52. It was a short, sharp punch in the face that I just hadn't expected, because Marie was my powerhouse and I thought she was invincible. At first, she was my mentor. Then she became one of my best friends, a kind of a big sister. She was invincible to me in my world, but no. And even in the reeling of her death, I somehow experienced peace, as I knew it wasn't her end. The body would decay and merge, but she goes on. To this day, she continues on. The light finally went out for my dad 9 months after Marie, and it was a relief more than anything that I felt. He'd been ill for a long while, nearly a decade, and it was tough for my mum because she was caring for him. It was tough for all of us to witness all of that. But I felt there was a chance now that I could finally let go of that frustration, fear, and tension that I had carried all those years. But no, it had to wait until after the funeral, and after others had told my brother and I what a great, kind man he was. And in truth, he was, at times. He was also hugely frustrated and angry with his life, and we often saw that side when others didn't. The main male figure in my life that I'd looked up to pretty much the whole time was my maternal granddad. He asked questions, he was different, he had an engineering kind of way of looking at things, and he found fun in pretty much everything. He was so curious about life and all its wonders that he once took a motorbike apart and a motorbike engine apart in my nan's kitchen, just simply to see how it worked and whether he can put it back together again. Oh, Richard. On his 100th birthday, he declared, "Right, I've shown you all how easy it is to get here. Now it's your turn." Challenge accepted, Grandad. He died 3 months short of his 103rd birthday in 2020. As he wanted, in his sleep, he could finally go and be with his beloved of 73 years. I know that I think and talk about death way more than my friends do, because I see death as part of life where many see it as an end. And as the years have moved on, I realised that whilst the physical body is here, I'm not dead, just to be clear. I think I have actually died many times, not in a near-death experience way, but in a way that 5-year-old no longer exists. I can still experience the childlike knowing that she had, but that 5-year-old is not here. Thankfully, the 28-year-old self-hatred is also died, along with many other thoughts and stories, beliefs of who I thought I was, but I'm not. And I find it magical about these deaths. And what I find magical about these deaths is that I'm starting to see that I'm not the leaves. At least I don't think I am. I'm starting to see myself as more the tree, connected above and below, and in a continual state of changing and growth. And all these thoughts of me and stories and behaviors and ages, they fall away. They're the leaves, but something stays. Something is consistent, grounded, and lives on. And maybe that's what that 5-year-old knew. Maybe that's what she knew when she was sat on that toilet and dismissed my dad's version of what death was. I've never been scared of dying. I don't want it to be painful, but I've never been scared of what that means. I think I've established that by sharing this lecture with you today. But what I was scared of was living, of being fully alive and sharing that aliveness with others. It's one of the reasons that I do what I do now. It's one of the reasons that I started the podcast. And it's one of the reasons that I am starting to put my thoughts and my journey out there more and more. Because I think the more that we share our own aliveness in each moment as much as we can, whether that's overtly with somebody or really fully experiencing it for ourselves, what I know is things change. How I show up each and every day has changed, and I'm sure will continue to change. But there will also be that consistent tree, that consistent reach up and reach down and reach out in as many directions as I can to continue growing and continue learning. And I'm really grateful that you are part of that and that you are sharing your thoughts, your insights, and your takeaways from these interviews and from these podcasts. So thank you. Thank you so much for subscribing and following and being here with me on this journey. I'd love to know what you're taking away from today. And I'd love to hear more about how you have come to your senses and what that has looked like for you in your life. I look forward to speaking to you again on another podcast. In the meantime, take care of yourself, look after those around you, and share that aliveness with yourself in every single moment.